Hi, Kari. Welcome to Doing It Differently. I'm so excited to have you here. And for everyone tuning in, Kari is a ethical love coach for nerds. And I would love if you could just introduce yourself and let everyone know what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Anne. I'm so excited to be here. So, my name is Kari Lu Cowell. As Anne said, I'm an ethical love coach for nerds. And it's so important to me in the love and dating and relationship space that we all cause less harm. And I think the way, like the narratives that we're told about how to be in relationship with other people, whether that's romantic or not, and how to interact with people, especially in a romantic and intimate way, actually causes a lot of harm because there are a lot of narratives in our society, in Western society, that basically make people feel less than. And we inflict a lot of harm on ourselves, whether that's like the mindset that we have or the words that we tell ourselves inside our own heads. And then inadvertently, we go and we inflict that harm on other people. So, why I call myself an ethical love coach is because everything I teach is through a lens of love.
Mhm.
And what I teach is how to cause less harm in relation to other people and to ourselves. Because, like, part of being human, like, we're just going to cause harm. Like, that's just part of the human condition. So, there's no way we can ever, like, fully eradicate harm. But it's really looking at how can I cause less harm? And then if I do cause harm, how can I repair that? And that's really like what my platform is.
Sounds beautiful. And I'd love to hear from you kind of where do you see what do you think is causing the most harm? Like, where do you see people kind of causing harm to themselves and also to others?
Well, I think it all starts when we're tiny children watching all the Disney movies, especially if like we're conditioned as female, right, in Western society. But our society really lauds codependent relationships. If you look at all of the media, if you look at the way we are told we like should relate to each other, especially like in a romantic context, like, oh, well, love is such a huge word. Relationship has so much weight. And really, like, I have a relationship with my grocery store clerk or the barista that I see every day. Yeah, it's transactional, but like on some level, I like care about them and we have a relationship, even though it is a transactional relationship. So that's really like the base of it is even just having these ideas that like love and relationship have like so much weight as words when really like they're just words. Whatever weight is on them is weight that we put on them, but we've been conditioned in such a way to believe that like if somebody like a friend, right, tells you or tells you that you love them, then oh my god, it's a big deal and we have to freak out and it has to be weird. Well, no, it doesn't. Like I can love a friend, I can love my spouse, I can love my parent, and I think familial love kind of is like more acceptable, but you don't see a whole lot of like just chumming around with your pals and people telling each other they love each other out in the general population. I think that's less true now than it has been in the past. But it still is like a weird thing for a lot of people.
Mhm. And what about specifically in like relationships? I know you had mentioned kind of the Disney, and I
Mhm.
totally agree that I think that seeing that concept where kind of love is this fairy tale, and if there's any problems, then they're obviously not the right person for you. And I can definitely, I've witnessed that in myself and in others, how harmful that can be in relationship. But I'd love to, I know that you are obviously have done a lot of self work and also a lot of work with clients, and so what do you kind of see as those recurring like internalized beliefs from maybe Western society or America or wherever that kind of keep coming up for people?
So I'm going to take like a multi-pronged approach because I work with all sorts of different relationship styles.
Yeah.
But like those relationship styles that are not like monogamous, essentially, aren't even part of the equation. So I'm going to set that off to the side. So right now I'm really talking about like just the general narrative we have, which is usually like cis het normative, monogamous normative. And like, I think the very first thing that causes harm is this underlying idea that people who are single are less than people who are in relationships, whether that's something we see like in TV and movies where it's like, you know, they're either single people are either like seeking love all the time, like with rom-coms, or you know, the single person is, you know, the fat character or like the sad character or whatever. But also this happens like in the workplace. Like, oh, can you, single person, work on Christmas because Johnny has a family, so he needs to go be with his family, but you're single, you don't have anyone that you love, like you don't have anyone that you're taking care of, so like you can work on Christmas, right? Like stuff like that. Like that is really like one of the main bases of like this harm, because then what that tells us subconsciously is that we're not worthy. We're single and we're not worthy. We're not worthy of love, affection, attention, having holidays off. Like, well, I might as well just work because like I guess I don't have anything, which is so untrue.
Yeah.
But that
Wow. I
thought
never thought about
permeates.
that. Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off. Continue.
No, you're totally fine. So it's like we have those thoughts that permeate that are, again, very subconscious. This is all very subtle, insidious shit. And then it's like that kind of self implosion of, I'm not worthy anyways of love. Not just like I'm not worthy of like getting time off, but I'm not worthy of love. And we are always constantly told, like, if you want the relationship, if you want the dream, you have to be perfect. Essentially, it's like what we're told, and it's what we see like in the movies and what we see in the advertisements. And again, this is all very like undercurrent things that we don't think about, because even in like the wellness world, and again, this is shifting, thank God, but like even in the wellness world, it's like, oh well, you have to love yourself before anyone can love you. Like, it's super harmful. Like, I can tell you from personal experience, I did not love myself for quite some time. And there were loads of people who loved me. And I still believed, oh, yeah, everybody loves me, because that was my mindset. But that doesn't mean I was being good to myself. And people still loved me. Like, it is possible for people to love you even if you don't love yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely had that same reaction to that phrasing, that saying. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Absolutely. I mean, it's easier. It's easier to believe that people love you when you love yourself, but
yes. I was like, I think where that comes from is like, it's hard to allow in the love when you don't love yourself. People can still love you, and yet sometimes you don't feel it. And so
right.
like I can get the nugget of truth from that. But I do think that there's this misconception, or I mean, everyone's allowed their own beliefs on relationships, but like this, I think there's also this idea that like you kind of need to do all your healing before you can get into a healthy relationship. And like, only then can you be in this thing. And it's actually like, but relationships are deeply healing. And in relationship, you can do massive amounts of healing together if you're both willing to do that work. And of course, you also should be doing your own work. But like, I think there's this misconception that like, you need to do it all first, then you get into a relationship and everything's like perfect from there. Or like, it's all on you to do the work versus like a partnership thing.
Right. Yes, I agree. Like there's so much healing that can be done in relationship that honestly like can't be done on your own. And I think the other thing too that is also very harmful is like this idea of like being healed, right? Like we're never done. We're a work in progress. We're a constant work in progress until the day we die, because even in, right, like it's going to come back at some time. It's just going to be a different layer. And like when I talk about healing, and the way that I like to look at healing is really like a spiral, or like a spiral staircase. Like you may be in this stasis, right? For a little while, we were like, cool, I like got through this thing. I like healed this wound. And, you know, now things are kind of moving along. Like the river's really like calm and peaceful. And then all of a sudden something happens that triggers that wound again. And you're sitting there like, oh shit, like I thought I worked through this. What happened? When really like the thing that triggered you get to do.
Sorry, say that again. You cut out a little bit on the just the
Oh,
last
okay. I was saying that like when we get triggered and it brings up that thing that we thought we healed, like it's just another layer of that healing that we get to do.
Totally. And I think viewing it that way allows people to have a lot more compassion for themselves and others. Because if there's no like, when we think it's like there's this end goal that we can't defeat, then it feels like we're always a failure because we're not there yet. But when you realize it's this full journey that's a constant unfolding, well, then of course there's more to happen. So you can allow yourself to be kinder as you're in the journey.
Yes, absolutely. And that's also like, this is another point I want to bring up, is because like I recently changed my title to ethical love coach for nerds. Before that, I was an ethical dating coach for nerds. But the thing about dating is that people automatically go to like, oh, people who are single. And I'm like, no, I mean, like, it's really people who are available, because you have like people who are ethically non-monogamous, or, you know, whatever, like who fall under that umbrella. But also like on a romantic context, you never stop dating, even if you're married, in and of itself is also harmful, because it is those little flirtations, those little acts of service, those like little pieces in your relationship that keep it healthy and keep it growing and keep it, quite honestly, happy and joyful and like something that's worth coming back to. So like, I feel like there's this misnomer that like, oh, well, I'm married, or I've been in this relationship for X amount of years. I don't need this. I don't need to date. Like, I don't have to worry about that. Well, no, because like anything in life, if you stop putting in effort, it stops growing.
Yeah. I think that's beautiful. And it's a great reminder, because there is such beauty that there is comfort and security in a relationship. But if you could, not even so comfortable is not the right language, but if you like, if you stop putting in any effort, well, it's going to kind of kill the romance and the, you know, the connection between you that's beyond just like the friendship, right? And so there is some like efforts that's required to have those date nights and to flirt and maybe dress up and maybe buy cute lingerie every once in a while if that's what turns you and your partner on. Like finding those things that might be a little bit extra effort, but like really enliven that energy again. Because otherwise it's like you're sitting, it's been 4 months, 5 months, and you've just been like sitting on the couch watching Netflix every night. And it's not exactly the sexiest thing in the world. Sure, it's beautiful to be able to do that and share those experiences, but you're kind of missing out on that zest when you don't kind of intentionally put that back in.
Right, exactly. It lacks excitement, like anything that we have done for an extended period of time. And it's funny that you bring up Netflix, because I feel like, especially like during the pandemic, like that's kind of been everyone's go-to. So it's like, okay, well, since this is really like all we can do, I mean, that's not totally true, but it's like stuff inside the house, right? Like, how do we spice this up? How do we make it exciting? Because our brain needs novelty. Our brain needs new things. It's constantly seeking out, like, I don't know if problems is the right word, but it's constantly seeking out stimulation. So if you don't have that stimulation, of course, something's going to feel boring. And again, like, yes, there's a comfort and a safety in being with a person for the long term. But then it's like, how do you create and keep that excitement? And maybe it doesn't even have to be like a date night, but maybe it's just like holding hands whenever you're out in public, or like, you know, cuddling on the couch. I feel like sometimes it's so easy to slip into, well, we just have to do these things, right?
Mhm.
Like we just have to manage the household together, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, okay, yes, and can we show appreciation for whatever piece of the household management that we do?
Mhm. Yeah, I've been playing with the practice of, because it's so easy to just take things for granted or expect things,
Mhm.
because you do kind of fall into like, you do this, I do this in the household. And so you almost, it's, instead of feeling grateful that they do those small things, you just expect it.
Mhm.
And so
Right.
the practice I'm trying is to try to bring in gratitude for the small things again. Because it does feel so much better to, yes, it's expected. Yes, you've kind of either, you know, out loud or, you know, below the surface agreed to these things, but like, still feels really good to have those thank yous. And to have the
Yeah.
gratitude for the small things that you're already doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really about reminding yourself to be mindful when you're in that like everyday pattern.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, it's bringing awareness, right? Yeah.
But that honestly, like that goes for any relationship that you're in, right?
Mhm.
Because there's so many people in our lives who do things for us, right? Because they love us, because that's part of, you know, taking care of somebody and loving somebody, is you want to make their life easier, make them happier, or like whatever. And like, I think even with like long-term friends, it's so easy to slip into that, like, okay, cool, this is what you do all the time, you know?
Mhm, mhm. Totally. My friends will tell you, I actually like, I love to love up on people. So like
Hmm.
when I'm feeling really loving, I'll just text people and be like, I fucking love you. Like, thank you for being in my life. And I'm lucky. I think words of affirmation, I love receiving, I love giving.
Hmm.
And so like that's one of my favorite ways to give, which feels really, obviously they love receiving that. But we're also going to the love language a little bit. But I also, it's funny, like acts of service or like gifts are not my thing. So for birthdays, I like kind of forget that and like, oh, but people really love receiving that. So like remember. So trying to like
Hmm.
remember not only to give love in the way that you love to give it, but to like think about how others like to receive it as well.
Yes, yes, it's such a huge thing to be mindful of. And even like the different dialects um within a specific love language. Like for example, my husband and I both appreciate quality time, and that's like our way that we receive love. But he wants to do things together, like go out, play a game, or like watch TV. And like for me, like, I mean, it's fun, don't get me wrong, I love doing those things, but like it's not really like connective. Like I don't necessarily feel connected. So
Yeah.
like for me, quality time means like getting into deep conversations, or like doing like soft eye gazing or partner yoga, or something that's very like meditative and like quiet and like energetic.
Yeah.
So that's been like something we've had to navigate, is like, oh, right. Okay. So when we play games together, like he feels fulfilled, but I still feel empty. So like,
Mm,
how do we like balance that out? Because it's so easy too to think like, well, quality time is quality time. So for spending
yeah.
time together, that's enough. But that's not true.
Mm,
There's so many complexities and nuances to what that means to each individual person.
yeah. Yeah. I love that you said that because that's so true. And it's being open and receptive to asking, right? Because
Hmm.
when I was first in relationships, you know, that old saying, like, treat others how you would want to be treated. And I'm like, in
Hmm.
relationships, I think that is so false because
Hmm.
your partner probably doesn't receive love the same way you do or think the same way you do. And so, like, if you were treating them the way you want to be treated, you might not be treating them the way they want to be treated.
Right, exactly. I read somewhere it's like the platinum rule or something where you like treat others how they want to be treated, right? Because we are so different.
I love that. Yeah, so that's just a good reminder of like, and also it's a good reminder of bringing the awareness to back to yourself.
Mhm.
Because sometimes, at least for me, as like a healing people pleaser, like my directive, like I go towards really wanting that person to be happy. And
Yeah.
so I kind of lose touch with, does this excite me? What do I actually want? Because I'm so focused on that. And so a big practice for me has been like, okay, but hold on, slow down. What do I actually want?
Mhm.
And so it's like
Mhm.
bringing the locus of control back to me instead of always being external.
Yes, I love that you said that because that actually is another way that I feel like current narratives in our society cause harm, especially in the romantic space, because I think a lot of us have this narrative that, like, oh, if you love someone, you just give them everything, right? And you give and give and give and make sure that they're well resourced. But never do you come into the equation. Cause, like, I'm a people pleaser, like a recovering people pleaser as well. And it is so challenging as someone who's a recovering people pleaser to even be like, well, what do I want? I don't even
Yeah,
know, right?
yeah, yeah. One of the,
But
yeah, go ahead.
oh, like even if you even if you didn't grow up that way, right? Even if you weren't conditioned to be a people pleaser, like we do still have this narrative, like if you love someone, like, right, like even like think about like the epic tomes from like King Arthur's time. If you love someone, you die for them, which I mean sometimes maybe, but like really like that's kind of fucked up, right?
You're right. It's like being the martyr. It's like the ultimate
Mm-hmm. Yes.
show of love. Yeah.
Yes. And it's so easy when we have that underlying narrative to be that people pleaser or even to like get into relationships where we either lose ourselves or we no, that's it. I'm just going to leave it at that because I don't remember the other part, but it really is. And I feel like a lot of people do that because we've all had those people in our lives who like get married or get a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a whatever, like a partner, and then they just fall off the face of the planet or they're like never without their partner. And it's like, okay, but sometimes I just want to hang out, you and me, because we used to do that. That's a thing.
Totally. I had a friend like that in middle school who did that. And like at that internalized for me, like I will never be that person. And I
Yeah.
almost like swung so far the opposite where I was like, I am a strong, independent woman. Like I need to do everything on my own. Even though I'm in a partnership, like this is my life, like blah, blah, blah. And so like part of my growth was actually being like, yes, and you're
Mm-hmm.
in a
Mm-hmm.
partnership, like, and you're creating this life together instead of being like two beings, like kind of on their same path, maybe holding the string. It's like you're still two
Yeah.
beings, and you're kind of creating this thing together. And so, and I don't know if I explained that well enough, but I hope you get the picture of like what I'm saying is like you're kind of, it actually is a true partnership versus like two individuals who like kind of aren't putting each other in the equation.
Yes. And it's funny that you say that because what that sparked in me. So please forgive me. I'm not a sports person. So this may be the weirdest metaphor, but like one of the things, like I grew up in a really toxic household. And like one of the things that I had to work on with my spouse was, he would always say, like, when we were fighting, he'd just remind me, he's like, we're a team, like we're working on this together. And I'm like, I don't even know what that means. Cause I was taught to like, if something's wrong, you just take care of it yourself. So I'm like, there's no team, there's just me. Right. Like, so like having to come
Yeah.
into that mindset and like figuring out how that works, which is
Yeah.
so weird for someone who's been independent for so long,
Yeah.
has created this different thing of like, where like if you're on a football team, right? Like everybody's working towards the same goal, which is like winning the game.
Yeah.
But like the quarterback is like running the ball. I think that's what they do. While like the linebacker is like playing defense and making sure that like nobody's tackling the quarterback. So like you each have your own different roles,
Yes.
but you're working towards like winning the game together. And then like sometimes, I don't actually know if this happens, but maybe it does. Like sometimes the linebacker and the quarterback are like on the same plane because maybe the linebacker is protecting the quarterback or something. I don't know. But you're in the same zone. And then sometimes you split off, right? Like, so it's just kind of this like beautiful like journey of like flowing together and then flowing apart. And you need both of those things to have like really great, healthy relationships. And that's really like, it's that difference between interdependency versus codependency. And they're nuanced and complex, but they're very, very different.
Yes. I think you so much more eloquently, even though I have no idea if the sports metaphor was accurate, because I don't care about sports at all. But yes, exactly that. You were individuals on the same team.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And like you are in this together and you still hold your sovereignty.
Right, exactly. And I think that's an important piece for everyone to remember in like all relationships, because I think a lot of times, like, especially if you've been conditioned as female, like you lose your sovereignty.
Or you forget that the other person has their sovereignty in that
Yes.
you feel responsible for their feelings, or like you want to, you're afraid that to ask too much, maybe forgetting that they are sovereign being and can say no. And so
Right.
you like don't even ask when they might have said yes in the first place, or been able to give you a firm no because they're an adult. And so it's that interesting, like you kind of take away their sovereignty by not allowing speaking your desires or saying those things. And like you're doing it from this place of love, but really you're like taking away their sovereignty. And so it's this weird dynamic.
Yes, it is a very weird dynamic. And I feel like that's where a lot of like resentment and exhaustion come in, right? Because if you're never speaking your desires and they're never getting met. So that's another harmful narrative that I think that we have in like the relationship space, is that like if someone loves you, they should just know like what you need, right? That's not how this works. Like nobody's a mind reader. And maybe like, maybe if you've been with someone for like 5, 10, 20 years, like you know what they like. Maybe it's easy to like order a surprise meal for them or something like that, or buy them their favorite book. But like we never really know. And we as human beings are so changeable and always so in flux that like maybe, my favorite book, like I'm very changeable. So this is a very me example, but like, maybe yesterday my favorite book was like Bridgerton, but today my favorite book is like Stephen King's Carrie, right? Like you never really know, because we're doing so much internal growing and changing that unless we speak to those things, which nobody ever really does, mostly because we're living our own lives, we don't really think about it, right? That like, there could be massive changes happening that nobody's aware of because we're inside our own heads and we just don't express them.
Yes. Yeah. I love that you said that, because I also hate that, because I've experienced it, right? Like I think in my first, like in high school, like my first relationship, I just like expected my boyfriend to know what I wanted. And I would get so huffy, like when he didn't, because you kind of are sold that narrative that like, they should just know. And it's so silly. Like you don't, we're not mind readers. And so it's like that I totally believe causes harm to you and to them, because you're feeling upset that you're maybe going into the story that they don't love you. If they did, they would know. And then they're being hurt because you're icing them out and closing them down and judging them without having even given them a chance.
Right, exactly. And I think so, and it's okay to have this narrative as long as you're aware that like, this is not actually something that can happen without having a conversation about it, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I'd love to hear your thoughts on like handling of emotions in relationships, because it can be, I feel like, especially romantic relationships, it can get so charged so easily. And so what struggles do you kind of work with your clients on in either being able to fully feel or healthfully process or express kind of their emotions?
I'm a big fan of the pause. As somebody who is very fiery and passionate with a partner who is also very fiery and passionate, like that is something we've both had to learn because it's so easy when you're emotional to escalate things until it doesn't even make sense anymore and you
Yeah.
don't remember what you were arguing about. And it does take practice because I'm all about like putting your emotions out there, and sometimes that requires a pause in
Mhm.
order to be able to do that so you aren't causing harm to somebody else, to your partner in this specific
Yeah.
case. But like I really come from a base of a background of like nonviolent communication where it's about expressing like this is how I feel when you did X, this is what I need, right? And it really
Yeah.
is expressing those needs and desires and how a certain behavior made you feel, which doesn't like I like to say that there's like no bad people because I inherently believe like most of the people on this planet are inherently good, but there are bad behaviors because we've all been conditioned in certain ways, and like we've all learned certain things about like how to move in this world, and those are not necessarily like the best ways to treat people.
Yeah.
But like it is coming back to this like taking blame off of whoever it is that you're upset with and coming back to and owning, okay, I was triggered. This is my piece. What was it that like triggered or activated me? Because triggered is actually like an actual like term for like big T trauma.
Yeah.
Um so I'm trying to get better at like separating the two because I feel
Yeah.
like triggered is like so overused right now. But like it's coming back to owning like this is how I was feeling. This is the thing that made me feel this way and this is what I need. And I feel like that just like helps discharge like all of those emotions, but sometimes to get to that place like we need to walk away, and I mean like if you need to do that, like make sure the person that you're arguing with or that you're emotional about knows so you don't just like disappear because that can be like really activating as well.
Yeah.
um but it's okay to take a pause.
Yeah. I love that. I also love that you named that sometimes when you don't take a pause, you bring it to a place where you're like, I don't even know what I'm saying is even true anymore. Like, I don't even know what
Mhm.
we're talking about anymore. I'm just like spewing to spew.
All right. And I'm not saying don't do that, but maybe don't do that at the person that you actually need to be having the conversation with. Like,
Yes.
go take a pause and call your best friend and like yell and vent, or like
Yes.
go for a run or a ride, like punch
Yeah.
a pillow or whatever. Like,
Yes.
but allow yourself to move through your emotions and your activation first before like trying to solve anything, because nothing gets solved when you're activated. Like, that's just the truth
Yes.
of the matter.
100%. And I'd love to know, I mean, we've been talking a lot in kind of the context of maybe a monogamous relationship. And I know that you work with a lot of other forms of relationship. And so I'd love to hear from you kind of like what are the same kind of issues that are faced in non-monogamous relationships? And where do you see kind of differences or maybe like amplifications or, what are the things you really have to root
Mhm.
into? Um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So honestly, like I feel like a lot of these things that we were just talking about are the same or similar. It's just like how many people are you doing it with, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, I feel like sometimes if we choose to engage in like ethical non-monogamy practices, like there is more communication, there are more conversations you have to have, there are more things that you have to think about. But honestly, like I feel like even if you're monogamous, like we all can learn things from ethical non-monogamy, because ethical non-monogamy is all about like everyone involved,
Mhm.
whether it's like me and my husband and then like my girlfriend,
Mhm.
we're all like involved in some way. Like
Yeah.
maybe she's not dating my husband, but like it's still like there's still a piece of me or a piece of him that comes through me and things that we have to navigate. And that creates this need for like communication and being aware of like power dynamics, because like couples privilege is a thing. It creates
Oh,
this need
interesting.
to like be more mindful of like where those power dynamics are coming into play. But even in monogamous relationships, I feel like it would create a better relationship if we were mindful of those things. Like even with my husband, who's a cis het white male, I'm like, can you please be aware of these power dynamics, because I'm a melanated female,
Yeah.
and there are certain things where like they may seem very simple and easy to you, but I have to overcome like years and like multiple layers of conditioning in order to be
Mm.
able to like just speak my mind, right?
Wow. Yeah. That's really beautifully said. And I haven't really thought about that, but it's so true. Yeah.
Mhm.
Like I think this just sparked for me to like, not to go to this dark place, but like when people are like, well, why didn't she just say something to have stopped
Yeah.
maybe an assault of something? And I think the Me
Yeah.
Too movement has like really shown a lot of light on why that might be hard,
Mhm. Mhm.
but it's kind of going to freeze. And so it's like
Yeah.
it shuts down all communication and that ability
Mhm.
sometimes. And so, but that can happen in really small ways because of the conditioning you might receive as a female, that you're supposed to be nice and polite and like that is valued, and
Yes.
like creating harmony and all of these things that are so in us now that like it feels so much edgier to name your desire or discontent
Mhm.
or all of these things. And I hadn't really thought
Yeah.
about that power dynamic before.
Well, and it's about, because like yes, Me Too is very like deep and dark, right? And like totally, totally necessary. But even in ways like, so like my husband is very bombastic and loud, and he takes up a lot of space, and like obviously like that's part of why I was attracted to him, because I'm the exact same way. But even as like a really strong independent female, like there are still times where I'm like, oh, all of the space is taken up in the room, so I like there's no room for me, right? Like there's no space for me to take up, because I like that's just the way that I was conditioned, right? Like if there are other people taking up more space, like you just don't take up space, right? And so like just your thing of saying like, I know you were talking about like Me Too, but like I hear from my male friends and my husband all the time, well, if you just have something to say, just say it, right? Because I think as women we're conditioned to like check in and ask like, how are you doing, or what do you think about this, or like create an open door for
Mhm.
someone to walk through, like for their opinion to walk through, right? And I found, because I have a lot of like cis male friends, but I found with them like they don't actually have those doors,
Mm.
and or they don't create those doors, and so they're just like, well, if you have something to say, you just say it. And I'm like, well, I feel like I don't, that's not how that works, right? Like that's not what I was taught. That's not even like polite, right? Which is a whole other piece of conditioning. But like I have to overcome all of that to
Mm.
like just say what I want to say, right?
That's so interesting. And also, this reminded me because I feel like I've actually had almost in the opposite way in my relationship,
Mhm.
because I'm more extroverted and he's more introverted. And so
Mhm.
I think in group scenarios, now it's not really a thing, but it used to be a thing. And I think where I would be like, well, why don't you just speak up? And he's like, for him,
Mhm.
it was like there's no pause for me to enter
Yeah.
that. And I came from a big family where we all talked over each other and that wasn't rude and that was just the way things were. And so it's not even male field conditioning. It's like your
Mhm.
culture, your
Yes.
family, like all of these things. And I think it goes back to like, oh, remembering that we don't all think the same way. And like
Yes.
what might be like, oh, vibrant and joyous and whatever might be like, oh, I feel like I don't have actually space to enter this. And like I would have never
Yes.
known that and unless you told me that, right? And so it's
Yeah.
like, so what you just said is just funny. I'm like, oh, that's there's so many dynamics at play with just being different humans.
And it's, you know, and it's so funny because my husband and I actually like discuss this a lot. Maybe even argue about it a lot because he's like you. He grew up in a big household. He had two older brothers and like his dad, and they're all like loud, outgoing people. Um, and so, you know, they would just say what they wanted to say and just like talk over each other and blah, 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 blah. And like, I came from like a relatively small family where like we were taught like to be very polite and very
Yeah.
like you wait your turn and like all of this other stuff. So yeah, it is very opposite but similar, right? Where I'm just like, oh, but there isn't space. And so what we talk about is like, 'cause he's like, well, I need to be authentic. Like, you know, I feel like I have to make myself smaller. And I'm like, it's not about making yourself smaller, but it is being aware of those dynamics so that you can create more space for people who might not be able to take that up themselves on that end, right? Like on his end or your end.
Yeah.
But like on my end or your partner's end, right? It is learning how to feel safe
Yeah.
and comfortable with just speaking up.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And it's just like we talked about the partnership thing. It's like you both coming together, like you both coming closer. And I think I probably had that same reaction too, where I was like, I want to be my authentic self. And like, but it's like, oh, but my authentic self also deeply loves you and cares and wants to make you feel seen and heard. And so it's not inauthentic to kind of create more pause. I can still be vibrant. I can still have my speaking voice, which is naturally a little loud, but like, it is this dance of finding like, okay, what works for us as a relationship.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same thing with like healing. It's like, yes, heal, like work on healing yourself and also heal in relationship. Like you need both. It can't just be one or the other. Because if we only have one, then it becomes very one-sided, obviously.
Yeah. And that's why I think it's important when you are in a relationship that you're both willing to do the work, right? Like it's not just one person kind of contorting themselves to like fit into their partners without the partner ever having to make any, you know, conscious compromise or choice to change. Which I think sometimes happens where someone like takes it all on them to like change everything. And that's where I think it can get unhealthy.
Yeah. And I think we need to expand that into looking at all of our other relationships too, because like how many, and I know like there are cultural differences and like, you know, do whatever you need to do or what feels right for you within your culture. But like, you know, how many of us do put on like, oh, I have to take on all of my family's debt or all of my family's healing or all of my family's whatever, you know, or like even thinking about like people who are moms, right? Like, oh, my life is my kids now.
Yeah. Totally.
And I mean, this is a whole other topic for maybe another episode, but like even just looking at how children are treated, because like children are autonomous beings as well. Like, yes, we need to give them structure as adults and we need to like guide them, but that's the difference. We guide them. We don't tell them. We don't force them, but like our job as like adults in their lives is to guide them.
Yeah, I love that. That just reminded me of kind of consent, like giving and receiving consent.
Yeah.
And so, you know, obviously giving children a choice, not just demanding them. And then obviously that plays into all relationships. And I'd love to just hear maybe how you help people give enthusiastic consent and like practice that.
It really, yeah, it's really about one, finding that safety. How do you find that safety? And I feel like the basis of finding that safety comes in you being authentic to yourself. And honesty. It's honesty, vulnerability, and authenticity, like always, 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 because first of all, you have to be honest with yourself, because if you're not honest with yourself, you can't be authentic. Like it's just not possible. But secondly, you have to be honest with other people too. And that on one level requires mindset, and on another level, it just requires practice, because like all of these things are really a muscle, right? Like, especially if I actually end up having a lot of clients who grew up in the church, which I guess isn't surprising at all. But not because I grew up in the church, but just because, like, especially because I work with people who are interested or exploring ethical non-monogamy. Like, I just feel like there's a lot of like shame and guilt that people want to work through in terms of that and getting out of like that monogamous norm. But like, yeah, it's honesty with yourself and then building that muscle of being vulnerable with people about your needs and desires. And I always tell my clients, I'm like, you need to start small and start with somebody that you already know is safe. And if you don't have somebody that you feel is safe to express these things to, that's why I'm here, because I am safe to express these things to. And it's also, I actually just did a live about this today, but it's also about like celebrating those baby steps. I thought, so I was coaching somebody yesterday, and we were talking about kink things, and like they, grew up a respectful, like taught how to be a respectful gentleman and blah, 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 blah. And their partner wants them to be dominant. And so they were really struggling with, well, I felt like, I like flew off the handle and like I pushed my edge and I like totally broke out of this. And their partner was like, well, give me more. Right. And I'm like, that's fine. Like, so we know where you might want to go, but also like celebrate where you went, because clearly that was an edge for you.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Yeah. And also, I feel like that's the thing where it's like checking in with what he wants or what you want and what your partner wants. And like, maybe they want more, but you're not ready yet. And so it's like, that's beautiful and okay. And celebrate that. Don't push past your edge. Yeah. Like slowly do those baby steps.
Well, and I'm a big fan of saying celebrate yourself, but then ask your partner to do it with you, and really like especially in kink, everybody needs to sit down and have conversations about these things before anything happens, in my opinion anyways, but like especially with kink, because there are risks involved. Like, sit down with your partner and have these really intimate conversations about like, this is my edge, can you celebrate me? Like I'm happy to like work towards this, but I need to take it slow. And the thing, like the image that popped into my mind was really like how we treat like infants and toddlers. Like, we give them so much praise when they just like roll over onto their belly, because it's this huge developmental step. Or like the toddler who's like clinging to the table and like shuffling along. Like, we give them so much encouragement and so much praise. And then all of a sudden we become adults and that's supposed to stop. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, we need just as much praise. It's just that the edges of what we're working on are more like mental and emotional, as opposed to like physical and tangible.
Yeah. And I think it's really important, like in those kind of situations, like, because the tendency is like, oh, they wanted this and I couldn't quite get there. So you like shame yourself or instead of celebrating. But it's also remembering that in that situation, it only excites your partner and really like brings them full joy and turn on when you are fully into it. And so like when you're not and you push past it, it doesn't only hurt you, it doesn't do anything for that, like it hurts them. And so it's like remembering that they want to see you fully in your own pleasure as well.
Yes, exactly. I just feel like there's so many different pieces that we can cover around like creating less harm in all of our relationships, but especially in our romantic relationships, because I feel like the romantic relationships and the familial relationships are really like where it gets magnified.
Totally. Yes, 100%. That's where you get most activated.
Yeah.
Yeah. The thing that your friend could say, you like wouldn't even react to. You'd be like, yeah, for sure, whatever.
Right.
Your partner says the same thing, and you're like, yes. Oh my God, I feel like I'm gonna have to have you on again because there's still so much more to talk about, but we've already been talking for quite some time. So I'd love to just kind of start wrapping up here. And I know that you have an amazing program coming up. I don't think it started yet, called Dungeons and Dating. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
And I
I'm
would
so
love to hear
excited.
about that because I just love the concept and like, yeah, please tell everyone who's tuning in about that.
Absolutely. So my 12-week signature program is called Dungeons and Dating. It's the best fucking thing ever because you learn how to you build the foundation of creating great relationships. So, yes, it's called Dungeons and Dating. We look at it through like a romantic lens, through a love lens because that's just like the easiest thing and the easiest way for me to talk about things, but these foundational lessons can apply to any relationship that you have, including like work, you know? But the things that we go over, and we spend a month on each topic because I feel like it's so important for people to really like root in and embody these foundational practices, but we work on bringing your unique magic to the dating space or whatever relational space you want to bring it into, and really working through healing and deconditioning and pulling out like who you authentically are, because that can be really, really challenging because we do have so many different layers of conditioning on us that like, maybe I'm loud and outgoing, but maybe that was also like a response to something else that was going on. And maybe that's not who I really am. It is who I Kari really am. But like, we learn how to behave in order to protect us from varying things that have happened, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of the first, or that's one module that we do. The second module that I am absolutely in love with is the rejection module. And that's looking at how to feel your feels and then also move through being rejected
Mm,
and also learning how to reject other people because that's a part of dating. It's also a part of life, right? And I love explaining this because even if you're partnered, right? Like if I touch my husband's thigh when we're like watching Netflix together and he scoots away, like that's a rejection.
mhm.
Or, right, like if he touches my thigh and I scoot away, I'm rejecting him. And it really is learning how to navigate those conversations in a way that all parties involved create or cause less harm and like are able to talk about these things without having this big like weight on it.
Yeah, yeah, totally. When you said that, I thought about like this idea of boundaries as a hard wall versus membrane. And so how can
Mhm.
you like reject or say no with compassion versus it being like,
Yes.
and a calling in, so it's connective versus like a shoving away and a shutdown. Um,
Mhm. Yeah.
and I think that's so important in relationship as well as dating.
Well, and I even talk about like there's so many things that we don't do out of fear of either hurting or getting hurt or hurting other people. Like the reason I made rejecting others part of this like rejection module is because I know so many people who are like, oh, I have to wait to break up with somebody because it's like their birthday or their grandma died or it's Valentine's Day. And I'm like, no, like that is the worst possible thing that you could ever do. There's no good time to break up with somebody. It's so much better if you just do it for the
Mhm.
most part, right?
Yeah.
And even looking at it from like a work perspective, like we fear rejection, which is why like so many of us like it takes so much time and effort to like ask for a raise or
Mm,
quit a job or
yeah,
like whatever. Like it all is so intertwined because we're constantly in relation with other people.
totally.
So I know it sounds weird, but that the rejection module is probably my favorite module.
No, so important. Yeah.
And then the last thing that we'll work on in our 12 weeks together is attracting the people that you want
Mm,
because it's so important. It's obviously important in dating. A lot of my clients are like, oh, it's so hard to find people that I share things with, right? Like hobbies or
yeah.
connections. And sometimes, I think a lot of times, especially for those of us who do a lot of growth and change in our lives, it can be hard to just attract people into our lives in general. Like how many of us, I know, have I been there? Actually, no, because I like attract people like crazy. But like I know so many people who are like, it's so hard to make friends as an adult,
Mm,
right?
yeah,
So how do you attract your greatest love or loves? How do you attract your greatest friendships? How do you attract people that you want in your life
yeah,
as an adult? It's so
yeah,
important.
yeah. And it also ties back to the foundation of like knowing what you even want, or like the
Mhm.
authenticity piece, instead of, it's not like, oh, you're just going to take anyone who comes into your life or likes you. It's like, do you like them and do you want to spend time with them authentically? Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, this course sounds amazing.
Thank
When
you.
does it start and how can people find you and your work?
Yes. So Dungeons and Dating starts, when does it start? It starts August 11th. And people can find me on Instagram at Kari Lu Coaching, Karilu Coaching. And then the link for Dungeons and Dating is super easy. It's tinyurl.com/Dungeons and Dating. So those are the two places you can find me. Oh, and I have a free Facebook group called Dating for Dorks.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. Carrie, I feel like we covered so much.
Yeah,
And
it was so fun.
I still want to do more. So I'm just very grateful for you coming on and having so much wisdom to share with everyone.
Thank you, Anne. This was so lovely. It's been such a joy talking to you.